decided to speak about this is, yeah, as Sarah said, the themes of ADHD Awareness Month and mental health were the themes of October for our planning meeting. So I felt that those two things combined together are something that I'm sort of is my area. It's my thing, mental health and neurodiversity in women particularly, and how it presents differently than how it might present in men or boys. Not for any reasons other than I am a woman and I have experiences with these things. They're the reasons why I might be interested in this particular field. So in terms of my mental health experiences, that's possibly another conversation. We could do another maybe themed event around mental health and others can share. However, today I'm going to be talking about my own experiences of being diagnosed with ADHD. Now, I'm no expert. I'm absolutely no expert. The presentation today really is just me talking and sharing my own lived experiences and things that I've learned along the way. I'm certainly not qualified to diagnose anybody, and I'm just sort of sharing information that really, really resonated with me, in the hope that others may benefit from that, may identify with something. Now, of course, not everybody has ADHD, but you know, maybe some people will be inspired to sort of think about it a little bit and be more aware. I think raising awareness is really important because, as Sarah said, there's more people now being diagnosed later in life with neurodiverse conditions, because I think the simple fact of the matter is, when I was young, nothing was really known about things like neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, anything like that. I mean, we just didn't talk about it. And certainly my parents' generation, there probably wasn't any support for things like that, or very little. So I think doing the presentation today is just going to be me talking about my own experiences, but also trying to raise awareness for people who may not be familiar with ADHD and don't know anything about it. And then, you know, if you do encounter somebody who has ADHD, you might be a little bit more, you might have a little bit more knowledge with which to work with that person if you have some awareness of what it actually is. Okay, so I have got a presentation which I will share, and I've got a video to show as well. So I'll just share my screen and go through a little bit of information with you. If anybody's got any questions, please do pop them in the chat. Joanna's going to be monitoring that, and I'm happy to be interrupted. That's the nature of ADHD. So I don't mind being interrupted. If anybody wants to ask a question while I'm talking, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so I've just simply called the presentation ADHD and Me, because as I said, I'm not an expert at all. I'm not here to diagnose anyone. I'm just literally sharing my own experiences and things that I've learned along the way about ADHD that I had absolutely no idea or understanding of before. So I'm just going to talk about three main areas. One, what is ADHD, in case anyone doesn't actually know what it is, my journey to diagnosis, and then subsequently treatment. And also, I've got some links of useful resources that I've found really, really, really helpful that I can share with you as well. Excuse me. So what actually is ADHD? So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what it is it's a neurodevelopmental condition, and it's very little known about where it comes from. There's lots of different sort of alternative ideas, as there always is within research, about what is actually the cause of ADHD. But the likelihood is it's an inherited condition. So if you or a member of your family has ADHD, then it's likely being inherited from another family member. So it's not something that is developmental, in that when if you ever have been a mom and you've had a baby, you think, oh, did I do something wrong? My child's got ADHD. You didn't. It's genetic. It's inherited. It's not because of anything that we do when we're having children. And it's just sometimes the way people are born. And it means our brains, people with ADHD, our brains are wired in a different way than people who are what you might describe as neurotypical. So neurodiverse and neurotypical, I suppose, are the two terms that are used quite a lot But again, as with all areas of research, we generalize, don't we? We generalize to try to categorize things so people can understand them, which is absolutely fair enough. So we've got neurodiverse and neurotypical behaviors, and neurodiverse behaviors. For me, this is my definition. That's how I feel about it. It means that the brain's wired up a different way. It means I'm wired up a different way than what you might describe as neurotypical thinking patterns. So there are actually three different types of ADHD. There's the inattentive kind, there's the hyperactive kind, and then there's impulsive, combined types. So I was diagnosed in August 2024 with the inattentive kind, and that particularly involves difficulty concentrating. So I do have a real struggles in my daily life concentrating for long periods of time, even longer than sometimes 15, 20 minutes at a time. Our brains are very, very active and sort of over processed, and it often affects your short-term memory. And I can also have problems with being easily distracted, and it's a real issue in that I have to constantly keep reminding myself to sort of concentrate and focus. And we have to have these strategies in place to help us focus on what we're doing. Otherwise, tasks become very difficult to complete, just sort of daily tasks.
Lucy,
then there's this sort of, yeah.
Sorry for that little interruption there.
Go ahead.
With the obviously the struggle to focus,
yeah.
What about your hyperfocus? Is there anything that you can hyperfocus on for long periods of time?
Yeah, that's right. I was going to mention that a bit later on in terms of things, how ADHD has affected me personally. But yeah, there is an element of hyperfocus, and I get particularly fixated on certain things, and it's almost like an obsession I'm formed. Like, for example, if I lose something, I'll put my glasses down, for example, and then I can't remember where they are, and I'll be absolutely fixated on finding them, and I won't be able to do anything else until I've found these glasses. But in a positive way, when I'm doing something that requires a lot of concentration and focus, if I become hyper-focused on that task, then I become determined to complete it, and often it makes me more efficient at kind of completing tasks which may be what you might describe as repetitive, because hyperfocus is something that does happen alongside inattentiveness. So yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, John.
Right, back over to you.
Okay. That's all right, thank you. And then there's the hyperactive kind, which is ordinarily associated with boys. This is partially why women and girls tend to get diagnosed later. Hyperactive boys who sort of can't sit still in class, are physically more active, are sort of jumping around, and that behavior can kind of be seen as disruptive, can't it? Particularly if we're talking about an educational setting. So if we're talking in school, in class, a boy, for example, might be jumping up and down out of his seat, not be able to sit still, can't concentrate, all those things that's associated with disruptive behavior. And ADHD, very commonly when I was young anyway, was associated with hyperactive boys. And I think, from my point of view, if that's disruptive in an educational environment, that would be more likely to attract attention than it would be a young girl, for example, who would be sitting in class, maybe daydreaming out of the window, not being able to focus, kind of thoughts wandering, but it doesn't often involve disruptive behavior. So that might be part of why young boys are more a focus of ADHD, or previously were, than young girls. It manifests itself differently. Now, again, I'm generalizing. However, there is also a third type, whereas it's combined type, which means you can have symptoms of both, and there's lots of overlap. I mean, we're all individuals, aren't we? And that we generalize to sort of try to describe and categorize things, but there's lots of overlap between sort of different types of ADHD and different characteristics and how that manifests differently in different people. So the inattentive kind, difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness, easily distracted. The hyperactive kind could be excessive movement, fidgeting, and impulsivity. And the combined type could be some symptoms of both. Now, I was diagnosed with the inattentive kind, so concentration is sort of the biggest issue for me. whereas excessive movement isn't. However, impulsivity I can also relate to, because I do things impulsively without thinking. And certainly when I was younger, if I reflect, when I'm trying to look at where my symptoms came from or how long I've been having them, when I was looking back, when I was younger, I did used to often impulsively buy things without thinking through the repercussions. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that. But impulsivity was certainly an issue for me, and it's often associated with the hyperactive type of ADHD. But for me, it also applies, and I've been diagnosed primarily with the inattentive kind of ADHD. So it's not one size fits all, is what I'm saying. You can have overlaps with your symptoms, and there's certainly combined type ADHD, which includes symptoms of both types. Okay, now, so as I've explained briefly there, as a generalization, how does ADHD manifest differently in women or girls than in men and boys? And as a generalization, more boys tend to be diagnosed with the hyperactive ADHD, and therefore their symptoms might be more noticeable and could be described as more disruptive, whereas girls become overlooked, which means they're acknowledged, and there's also less acknowledgement and understanding of ADHD in girls, because, as I said previously, they might be daydreamers, they might be looking out of the window, but that behaviour is not disruptive, therefore doesn't attract attention. There's also a lot less understanding of I think, ADHD in girls and women, because of that, for that same reason that sort of boys were the focus of ADHD behaviour. It really primarily affects young hyperactive boys, and there wasn't much information available about how ADHD might look in girls. So it often has been overlooked, and there's less acknowledgement and less understanding in general. Now, I know that that's changing, because there's been a massive increase in the diagnosis of people later in life with ADHD. And I think that really is massively down to an increase in awareness. More people studying special educational needs, for example, raises awareness. That becoming a very sort of focused area of education, then more people start to learn about special educational needs. And then as part of that, neurodiversity, then start to recognise it more within the children they're teaching, and then even in themselves. So I think possibly the increase of the provision for SEND and SENCO provision within schools has had a really positive influence on the sort of people being able to recognise neurodiversity in girls and in boys. So that's just my brief theory. It may or may not be supported with with evidence. I'm just talking about my own personal anecdotal thoughts today. So what I thought I might do is just tell you about how I found out that I had ADHD. How did I work it out and what happened? So a simple quiz started it all. I've written there. I remember a few decades ago now being in an office in the old Foster building. I don't know if anyone remembers that building. And I walked into the sort of staff room, and there was somebody asking questions in the staff room, like a type of quiz type thing. And I thought they were preparing for some kind of class, some teaching materials, you know, they were discussing. And I said, oh, all of those things applies to me. What are you talking about? And it turned out that they were talking about ADHD. And it was like I hit a wall. And my initial reaction was, well, that's impossible. I can't be. There's absolutely no way that I've got ADHD. How could I not possibly know that before? And I knew absolutely nothing about it. It had never been mentioned, or even a possibility that was any of them things I experienced anything to do with ADHD. So that was a shock initially, and I was in utter denial. It absolutely can't be. That's impossible. It was like almost like that information had hit an internal wall and bounced straight back off again. I didn't internalize it at all. I wouldn't accept it. I had absolutely no concept that would apply to me. And then bit by bit, the older I got, the more my problems started to interfere with my working life, and more sort of an increased knowledge and increased awareness of myself. Time passed, and I started to think, well, hang on a minute, maybe I do have issues with my concentration, and maybe this is something I should think about. And so then I started to read a little bit more about it on an informal level, just reading about sort of articles, and I was drawn to anybody that was talking about ADHD on the news or television programs or the internet or whatever it was. I was drawn to that because I thought, oh, I wonder if this does make any sense. And the more I researched it myself on just an informal level, the more it started to make sense to me that this was something that I had to deal with. So just a few issues and things that I've learned about in my research over the years on ADHD. So I didn't know when I was younger that even things like when you're growing up, when you're maturing, your brain's developing, in children with ADHD, like almost maturity, executive functioning, and developmental sort of progress can be delayed in people with neurodiversity by almost 2 to 3 years. So things like your teenage years, when you're developing, when you're growing up, I certainly felt like I was way behind my peers, and I had absolutely no idea why. Absolutely no idea. So one of the things that, when I was really thinking about my own behavior, one of the things that really felt like something that had applied to me was that I felt out of step with my peers when I was a teenager. I felt like everybody knew more than I did. I sort of just felt like, maybe I've got a lot to learn. I just ignored it. I didn't really think anything of it. But then I learned later on during my research that even people with neurodiversity or ADHD can be developmentally behind by a good 2 or 3 years. And that was key for me to understand, because I always did really feel out of step with my peers at that age. You can observe symptoms of ADHD and neurodiversity from the ages of about 7. And I think that's particularly within an educational setting. I think before that, the education maybe is a little bit less formal within school environments. And as you start getting into key stage 2 and things start getting a little bit more serious, then symptoms can be more easily observed within schools. Executive functioning can be affected. So things like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, things like that. If you notice that in neurodiverse people or children, that can be something that causes a lot of social problems. Now, that was something that I identified, not necessarily in a huge way, but there are times in my life when I think back to it and I think, yeah, maybe I did lack a bit of emotional intelligence at that time. Maybe I did sort of, maybe I was a little bit behind with those sort of executive functioning skills, and I had no idea that was to do with ADHD. No idea at all. Emotional regulation can be an issue. So things like, for me, I feel at times like my emotions are almost like, if you imagine your emotions are a body of water, some people's emotions are like ripples on a pond, and mine felt like tidal waves that I was being completely knocked over by. And it was only when I got my head around that I thought, well, hang on a minute, that can't be right. Why do I sort of get so stressed so quickly? Why do I react like a fuse? Like if somebody's lighting a fuse, why do I react like that? Why don't I sort of react more slowly? And then you sort of start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, that maybe there is something going on with me in emotional regulation. And then once I knew that, it became more manageable. Even just that awareness that those things were affecting me. One of the things that I did learn is that people with ADHD have difficulty prioritizing tasks. And that was always an issue for me. So I would always do the most important thing last, and then find myself rushing through it and generating stress for myself that was sort of unnecessary. But difficulty in prioritizing the tasks. Part of that is procrastinating, because the ADHD brain is so active. If you know you've got something difficult to do, you put it off because you think, oh, this is going to be a mountain to climb for me, because it's going to require concentration, it's going to require thinking, and my brain's already overactive and I can't concentrate. So I procrastinate and I put off things that I think I'm going to find a challenge. Time management is an issue. I constantly underestimate the length of time it's going to take me to do things. Constantly. I think, oh, well, if I leave at 5 o'clock, I'll get there for 10 past. if it's and it might be a 15-minute walk, and then I'm late, and I think, oh, why am I late? And it's because I've got a complete I've got a real difficulty with working out how long a task is going to take me to do. Now I'm learning, I'm getting better, but that was something that really worried me when I was young. I was always late. I used to, in fact, a lot of my friends had a nickname for me, which was Last Minute Lucy. And in I'd arrive 10 minutes after everybody else with my bag overflowing with pieces of paper, and I would sit down and people would go, here she comes, Last Minute Lucy. And that was a running joke. And I had no clue that it was because I had any issue with how to measure time in my brain. No clue. I also remember being asked a question years ago. Somebody said to me, if you were put in a room on your own, would you have any idea how long you'd been in there? And I would have absolutely no clue. If there was no clock and I was in a room on my own, I'd have absolutely no idea how long I had been in there. It's the thing, it's time blindness. And that definitely applies to me. I wouldn't have a clue. I have to use the calendar on my phone for everything and allocate time and remind myself of sort of how long I've been doing things. And all of this is related to how our brains are wired up differently. Injustice intolerance is one that I found really interesting. So people with neurodiversity or ADHD, when it's something that is unfair, when something happens that's unfair, it creates a really strong emotional reaction, and it creates, it's very difficult to process because it's not logical. So say, for example, there's something that happens which is unfair, like, I'm trying to think of a good example now. Something that you feel have a core sense of injustice, like something like a child gets an award because their mum's the head teacher, for example. Just to give you an example, okay? That would be too much for me. That would be too much for me. That this somebody had been given an award because of a reason that wasn't to do with the task. I would find that extremely difficult to understand and extremely difficult to accept, because there would be such a level of injustice about it. But why hasn't it been done fairly? Why isn't it logical? Why isn't there a system? And if there's nothing, and if that doesn't happen, it creates a real sense of injustice for me that I can't cope with.
Lucy,
yeah.
When that happens, because I often think if I feel as if something isn't fair, and some of my colleagues might, well, maybe more George and John, who I work with on a daily basis, if something isn't fair that comes out, I get really annoyed on other people's behalf when it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with me.
Oh,
to a certain extent.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be about me. It doesn't have to be about me at all. Anything to do with injustice or unfairness, can't stand it. I can't tolerate it at all. I have real difficulty with it. That's possibly part of why EDI is a field that I'm interested in, because equality, diversity, and inclusion, it's all about fairness and I think that's why I've developed a strong sort of interest in that field now, because I understand a bit more about why I find injustice and it's so intolerable. I can't stand it. I absolutely can't stand it. So that's something to do with, neurodiversity wiring there, that we can't understand why that's not fair. Why has that happened? Why haven't they followed the rules there? It's too unjustified. Another thing that I learned during my sort of learning about ADHD is something called RSD, which is rejection sensitivity disorder. And people with ADHD, I remember from my own experiences being told things like, well, why can't you do it? Why can't you do it? It's a basic task. It's basic maths. Why can't you do it? Why can't you organize yourself? Why are you always late? Always this, why haven't you done this piece of work? You've had an hour, you've been sitting there looking out the window. Why haven't you done it? And we get this constant sort of barrage of comments when we're growing up, because people don't understand why we can't do the same things and organize ourselves in the same way. So sort of rejection's part of the narrative. And then when I found it very difficult as a teenager, certainly, to take constructive criticism. So say I was doing a sport, for example, and the coach would try to give me some feedback. I would overreact and I just didn't want to listen to anything that they had to say, because I was so sensitive to any kind of sort of anything that felt critical. I was overly sensitive about, and it's to do with that constant message that you get. Why can't you do basic tasks? You know, and it's just a lack of understanding about what's going on with the thinking of a person with neurodiversity or ADHD. We have a massive tendency to overthink and overanalyze because our brains are so active, but they're often firing off in lots of different directions. So I often have one thought and then I think, oh, well, I'll go, what will I do for the dinner shopping? And then I start thinking, oh, have I put that washing in? And then I start, what about this gnome that I was going to buy from the garden centre? You know, it like literally your brain fires off in all directions, and it's always active all the time. And we have a tendency to overthink and overanalyze lots of what goes on because the brain is so busy, we often don't emotionally process things in the same way. And then we start getting things like fixations on a certain interaction that you've had with a colleague or a friend, and then you start overthinking it and overanalyzing reasons why. And actually, it was nothing. There was nothing wrong with the interaction. There was nothing you did. There's nothing you could have said differently. But because you weren't concentrating, you go back and you review it and you think, oh, why did that happen? What did I do? So it's a very difficult condition to kind of relax with, because there's always those thoughts sort of running around in your head. I'm going to play a video now, I think, rather than me talking anymore. I've mentioned all of that. We do get overstimulated. I've mentioned procrastination. I've mentioned delayed gratification is an issue for me. So if something is, if the reward is way in the distance, I find it really difficult to deal with something. So I'm working towards, say, for example, I'm saving up for a holiday. I find tasks like that almost impossible because the holiday maybe is next year or it's a way off in the future. The holiday isn't now. Why isn't the holiday now? The thing I'm working towards and saving up for isn't now. And I find that really difficult. I have to sort of talk myself into things that maybe people who are neurotypical would be able to be perfectly capable of waiting for, and logically think, yeah, it's next year, it's fine. People with ADHD can't. It's not easy to process something where the reward is not immediately now. I overreact sometimes about really small things, but if there's a crisis and something really serious happens, I'm quite calm. I'm the one that can sort of handle it. I'm quite messy and untidy in some ways, but I always know where everything is. I'm slow to process new information and I have difficulty following instructions, but there are lots of positives about ADHD. I mean, when I first got diagnosed, I was sort of a bit upset because I thought, well, you know, why didn't I know this earlier? Things could have been different, and sort of I've been robbed of my life, you know, give me a normal brain and give me my life back. But actually, the more you start to come to terms with it and the more you start to realize there are skills that come along with it as well. I mean, creative problem solving is something that I've always had a knack for. And I find, because I find it difficult to process new information, I can think my way out of most problems. So if I'm presented with a problem and I don't know the answer, I'm quite confident that if I sit and think about it for long enough, I'll be able to find a solution, because I've had all my life to work around things that maybe were standard or typical for others. So actually, it's a bit of a gift in some ways, because I'm confident in my ability to solve problems. I know that I can sort of cope in a crisis. I know that I've got sort of talents and things that I'm still, you know, sort of looking into and trying to pursue. It's not all bad. It really isn't. And I think that the more you sort of come to terms with that and you learn things about yourself, the more you learn how positive it can be as well. Okay, so I'm going to play a short video which might help, because sometimes I think it's difficult to explain to others. Say if you get diagnosed with ADHD, how do you explain to family members what ADHD is? So there's a resource here, which is a YouTube channel, and it's called the ADHD Chatter Podcast. And it contains short videos about people talking about their experiences with ADHD and experts talking about it and things like that. But there's some of them that I've found really useful, and they're really short. And I just wanted to play one just to see if anybody could relate. So just bear with me a second, and I'll share my screen and show you this very short video from the podcast channel. I've got all the links as well that I can share in case anybody wants to follow it up. Hang on. Share. Okay, so how to spot ADHD in women in 25 seconds. I'll just play this quickly.
5 seconds. They will overthink everything. That's because the hyperactivity is in their heads. It's like 5 squirrels on speed back there, and it never stops, ever. And this will cause a lot of anxiety, which is why some are misdiagnosed with an anxiety disorder. They will be great in a crisis, but can become overwhelmed over something small. They will overshare at social gatherings and then spend months thinking everyone thought they were too much and now hates them. Even they will have a messy room, but know the exact location of everything. When someone tells them a story, they will reply with a similar story. They're not trying to make it all about them, it's their way of showing they understand. They'll be very good at hiding their problems, so people will think they're happy. Maintaining friendships is hard because object permanence makes it easy to forget people exist. They will spend like they are constantly just barely staying above water. They'll wish they could go back in time, put their arms around the young themselves and reassure them that everything is going to be okay and that they're not broken, just different. How to spot ADHD in women in 20...
I like things like this because my brain that is unable to concentrate likes short bursts of things like that. Now, I learned something from things like that. Just that, how exhausting it is, for example. And he's just very, very quickly telling you things for me that I could relate to, that I understood. And it wasn't too much. Yeah, absolutely. I'll share the link. It wasn't too much for me to process because it's short bursts of information. And it just made total sense. So one of the things that I have learned a lot from about ADHD is that particular podcast, which I'm happy to share the link. It's ADHD Chatter Podcast, and it's on YouTube. There's a lot of useful sort of short clips and videos on there, which, like I say, for me as somebody who has a short concentration span, I found really useful and I learned a lot from. And it really made me think, it's not just me. These things make sense. And there's a YouTube channel about it, so it applies to others as well. You're not alone with it. So I found some useful short videos on that YouTube channel. I'll just talk briefly about how I did eventually get diagnosed and treated a little bit. And then I'm conscious that I have been talking for a while and I would like to give people an opportunity to ask questions or contribute themselves. So I was diagnosed in August 24, and it took a long time to get to that point where I was ready to go to the sort of GP and push for a diagnosis. And I had attended a workshop actually here at work, and it was with somebody who was very good from the ADHD Foundation. And he mentioned something called Right to Choose, which is where you can go to your GP, but you can receive treatment from a private organisation on the NHS, because you've got a right to be sort of treated by anybody. And it was a particular list of providers, and Psychiatry UK was one of them, and they particularly focus on diagnosing people with ADHD. So I went to my GP, I explained all the things that I'd learned about myself. And when you're speaking to your GP, you have to explain how it impacts on your daily life and how it's impacted sort of on your life. And for me, not being able to concentrate has impacted on a lot of things. I mean, I mentioned sport earlier, and I liked sport when I was young, but I could never concentrate for long enough on what I was doing right. So I never made any improvements, and I never got any better. And I couldn't do team sports because I just couldn't process the information that the coaches were sort of were giving to us. And then if they moved my position, if I was on a team, for example, and I always played in the same position, and then moved me to a different position, I would have a complete meltdown because I just didn't know what I had to do when things were changed for me. So I definitely think that anything that requires dedication and concentration and perseverance, like sport and art, are two hobbies that I would have really liked to have sort of done when I was younger, but perseverance and concentration were required, and not being sensitive when people try to help you improve. All of those things are required for those hobbies, and I didn't have any of those things. So it's definitely impacted on my life when I was younger in terms of that. And as I've gotten older, it's about significantly my concentration, and trying to focus for any longer than about 15 minutes is quite a challenge. Organising myself and my time. And you think about all the things you learn about ADHD, think about how it applies to you, but you also have to think about how it's affected your life. Then you go to the GP and you explain to them what your symptoms are, how is it impacting onto your life. You need a diagnosis because you want to be able to receive treatment, one of which is medication. So eventually, I managed to get the GP to do the referral. And then I rang Psychiatry UK a few months later, and they said, no, we haven't received your referral because we weren't taking referrals within this 3-month window. And of course, that 3-month window was when my referral had landed at Psychiatry UK. So I went back to the GP and I said, they haven't got my referral. Why haven't you done anything about it? And they said, oh, well, it was refused. And I said, yes, it was refused because they weren't taking referrals. Have you sent it back? So I had to go back. They sent it back again, and eventually got on the waiting list. 10 months later, I had an appointment with a psychiatrist. It was a video appointment. It's quite a long appointment. I mean, it was about an hour and a half. And they really sort of delve into your history, and they talk a lot about you, talk you through all sorts of things through your life. And it was quite straightforward. The diagnosis was straightforward, which I wasn't sure was going to happen, because I thought, well, I think I've got this, but does a professional? So I wasn't sure when I was being assessed by a professional whether they would turn around and say, oh, no, it's something else. And like on that video, so many people get diagnosed with things like anxiety or depression or mood disorders because they're showing symptoms of ADHD that manifest other ways. And I thought, is he just going to tell me that I've got anxiety? But he didn't. It was very straightforward. It was a long appointment, but he immediately said at the end, yes, I think you fit the criteria for inattentive ADHD. And then there's the emotions where you think, well, why wasn't this, identified before, etc., etc. But there's also relief that you can understand yourself better, and there's an explanation for all of this sort of chaos that goes on on a daily basis. So it was worth it for me. I'm definitely glad I pursued a diagnosis, and I'm definitely glad I've sort of done the work to process what that then means. And then I had to wait 10 months on the waiting list for medication, which I'm not sure if I'm going to take. There's various other reasons why I may or may not take this medication, but I might try it. But it's a stimulant medication that they give you. And if you get this stimulant medication, it's supposed to have the opposite effect on people with ADHD and calm us down and help us to concentrate and sort of slow us down. But it is a stimulant. So for me, I'm still debating on whether I'm going to take the medication, but I think I probably will. And it's a triage system where you message the sort of practitioner that's issuing you with your medication. And you can message them backwards and forwards, but you don't have a face-to-face consultation with anyone. I was hoping to have a chat with somebody about the medication. What does it do? What are the side effects? What can I expect? And there was none of that. It was just kind of a messaging system. So I said I wanted to think about it. So I'm on a pause at the moment because I'm going to think about whether taking medication is the right thing for me. I think in the end I probably will. But that's an individual choice. It should be up to you to decide how you want to manage your ADHD if you do feel you have it or you get diagnosed with it. And then other thing I will say that really helped is I've done a lot of research on this, and you find a lot of correlations between autism and ADHD. And there's such a thing called ADHD, ADHD as well, which has a lot of overlaps. You have to pursue a diagnosis for autism separately to ADHD, and I haven't done that yet. But I certainly think a lot of the symptoms of ADHD resonate with me as well. And now I think I'm just determined to find the answers so I can help myself and move forward and understand myself better. And I think it's absolutely key. It's been absolutely key for me to understand myself and how I function as a person to get this diagnosis. And it's also helped me to recognise patterns within my children. My daughter's on the waiting list for a diagnosis of ADHD. And if I hadn't worked that out in myself, I would never have known. My daughter's intelligent, she's cleverer than me. And she comes out with all these things. And I think, how do you know that? 13, you know, she's really switched on. And she came to me and she said, I think I've got ADHD. I said, what are you talking about? And she told me all these symptoms. And I said, and I hadn't told her at that point that I'd had my diagnosis. But because I had, everything she was saying made sense. Whereas if I hadn't found that out within myself, I don't know how I would have understood what she was trying to express. So now she's on the waiting list. And then my son as well is exhibiting sort of symptoms of hyperactivity. And I think for me, it's about getting the children, for my children to be aware of themselves. And if they do have ADHD, to be aware of it. And to have the correct educational support so that they can achieve in life everything that it's possible for them to achieve, you know, so they're not held back by being neurodiverse if they are. So I think pursuing my diagnosis has really helped me to understand myself and also helped me to understand my children, and if they need support, know what to do to get it for them. So for me, it's been a really important step. Now, I feel like I've been waffling on now for ages. I hope I've made sense and it wasn't too chaotic. And I'm happy to share about all my links and my presentation and everything, if anybody's interested. But I would like to allow some people some time to ask questions if anybody's got any, please. And thank you very much for listening.
That's really interesting, Lucy.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Just wondering specifically about RSD that you mentioned, the rejection thingy.
Yeah, reactive sensitivity dysphoria, yes.
Yeah. How do you manage that specific kind of element when, particularly at work, when you might be receiving feedback, or maybe how do we support students who might have this and they're receiving feedback on their work? That just seems like such a tricky thing to navigate.
That's a really good question, certainly for us supporting students as well. How I navigate it is just by understanding myself better. That's how I navigated it. So I think to myself, okay, I know that I'm sensitive to sort of when people are trying to give me constructive criticism. But then, you know, you've got to rationalize that and say, but it is just constructive criticism. It's designed to help me improve. And you have to think to yourself, you know, I feel sensitive about this because of things I've experienced, not because somebody is trying to sort of make me feel a certain way. You know, no one giving me feedback is deliberately trying to make me feel bad in any way. They're trying to help me by giving me this constructive, you know, feedback so I can grow and learn as a person. Now, as an adult, I know that now. Whereas I think supporting younger people must be much more difficult. I think if you're sort of, you know, you've matured and you can see for yourself that RSD is something you suffer from because you're neurodiverse, you're aware of it, you can stop yourself and say, well, I'm feeling this way about what this person's saying because I have this particular issue with sensitivity and rejection. So you can rationalize it and say, I know that this person's not doing it to help me, to make me feel a type of way. They're doing it to help me. And that's a maturation thing. You know, you become mature and more aware of yourself, and you know that. Supporting younger people who don't know that they have RSD or aren't aware of it is a lot more of a challenge. And I think we just have to be really clear with what language we're using when we're giving feedback. And things like, you know, you start off with something positive and then you make sure students who you feel might be a little bit sensitive to it, you can say things like, you know, I'm doing this so I want you to succeed. I want you to benefit from my advice. I want you to improve your grades. I want you to have a really good degree. I want you to be successful. And these are the reasons why I'm suggesting this is how you could improve your assignment, for example. So I think it's about being a little bit sensitive to students. And if a student present symptoms of sort of signs of being a little bit sensitive to feedback, then it's about the language we use and about how we deliver feedback that helps support people to accept it, I think, is what I'd say. Just being positive and making sure students understand why they're getting the feedback they're getting.
No, I'd agree with that, Lucy.
Would you? Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. One thing I've just dropped in the chat as well, another thing when obviously Lucy's mentioned about more awareness,